There's also news overnight in Ukraine. Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk announced today he'll visit the U.S. this week. This as more Russian troops moved into Crimea. The Russian government is also threatening to suspend international inspections of their nuclear weapons after the U.S. imposed sanctions late last week. Former Vice President Dick Cheney joins us now. Good morning.
Morning, Charlie.
Tell me what our options are today.
Well, I think I worry when we begin to address a crisis by the first thing we do is take options off the table. I don't think the administration should do that.
Have they done that?
In the sense saying that no military. He seems to operate that way most of the time. There are military options that don't involve putting troops on the ground in Crimea. We could go back and reinstate the ballistic missile defense program. It was taken out. It was originally going to go in Poland, Czech Republic. Obama took it out to appease Putin. We could do training exercises in Poland, joint exercises. We can offer military assistance in terms of equipment, training, and so forth to the Ukrainians themselves. So
there's some activation of military forces, are there not?
But some activation?
In terms of having forces come and make their appearance there.
On our part?
Yes.
I'm not aware
NATO.
of any detail. NATO, I'm sure NATO will think about it.
Right.
It's very important to NATO. A lot of the NATO members were part of the old Soviet Empire, Warsaw Pact, the Baltic states, Poland, Hungary, and so forth. And they are very worried when they see Putin absolutely ride roughshod over solemn commitments he made and that the government of Russia made, like the Budapest Memorandum, when Russia, the U.S., and Britain guaranteed the borders of Ukraine in return for Ukraine giving up their nuclear weapons. Very important, and Putin has just blown that off. He's gone right through it, and people begin to wonder, is his word ever good for anything?
So that's the question. Do you believe that President Putin believes that President Obama is weak and will pass through his red lines, and therefore he should be tested?
No, I don't know whether he believes he should be tested. I think there's no question but he believes he is weak. He has seen this so-called reset policy that's led to giving up on the ballistic missile defenses, for example. We have created an image around the world, not just for the Russians, of weakness and indecisiveness. The Syrian situation's a classic. We got all ready to do something. But a lot of the allies signed on at the last minute. Obama backed off.
But don't you think that the president is trying to do and take all the diplomatic steps that he can take now?
I think he is, but I also think he hasn't got any credibility with our allies. I just happened to speak to a couple of members of the European Parliament within the last couple of days who indicated that the request for the Europeans to cooperate on sanctions is more difficult than it would have been because of what happened with respect to Syria, that in fact they got ready to go, and at the last minute the U.S. President Obama backed off. So he's got a much higher mountain to climb in order to try to mobilize European governments to come on board for something other than military action.
Former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, for both President Obama and President Bush, said today, "I do not believe that Crimeans will slip out of Russia's hands," suggesting that the Russian troops will not leave and that there will be a different situation on the ground in Crimea.
That's very possible. But I don't.
Can we stand that in your judgment?
In my judgment, we have to recognize the fact that this is an egregious violation, if you will, of treaty commitments, a solemn obligation on the part of the Russian government to recognize the boundaries of the newly independent states of the old Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. And that was one of the most significant developments in the 20th century, and Putin is simply ignoring all of those commitments. I don't think he should be able to do that without paying a price.
But as you know, in Georgia, the people will make the case that Russian troops remained, and that it was a very different situation because we did not or were not able to respond more.
Right.
So what is that lesson of that?
Well, the lesson
in your own administration.
The lesson of that, I think, it came at a time sort of at the end of the Bush administration, at the beginning of the Obama administration. But it was a deep concern to our friends in Western Europe. We did take some steps in terms of providing assistance to Georgia. We had ships in the region and so forth. So there were steps taken, but they weren't effective in terms of driving Putin out. And part of the problem in that case, there was a question about who actually provoked whom with respect to the Georgians.
Do you believe sanctions will be enough?
I don't know. I don't have any way to evaluate
and if they
that.
are not,
I think they ought to be.
I mean, How much of a confrontation does the United States want to engage in on the ground?
How much? The real question is, how much do you want to allow Putin to ignore those agreements, very, very important agreements that ended the Cold War, led to the reunification of Europe and the liberation of millions of people from under the boot heel, if you will, of the Soviet Union. That was one of the most significant events of the 20th century. And now he's starting to chip away at that. He's trying to reverse those developments very clearly with respect to Crimea. And I do not believe that we should allow him to do that.
But the question then is, if you do not believe we should allow him, what are we prepared to do to stop him?
Well, that's the key question.
And what's your answer then?
And my answer is reinstate the ballistic missile defense program in Poland. He cares a lot about that. Conduct joint military exercises with our NATO friends close to the Russian border. Offer up equipment and training to the Ukrainian military. Take steps that will guarantee and convey the notion, especially to our friends in Europe, that we keep our commitments. So far, that's in doubt. And I think it's much a matter of sending a strong signal that the U.S. will keep its commitments to our friends and allies. That's been in doubt for some time now because of the policies of the Obama administration. And this becomes a crucial moment.
So you think those nations, those Baltic nations, should be nervous as to whether NATO and they're members of the NATO alliance will come to their defense?
Yeah, we have a treaty obligation under Article 5 of the NATO treaty to attack against ones and attack against all. And we absolutely, I think, will find if you go to Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia today, that our friends there recognize they've got Russian minority populations inside. They were under the control of the old Soviet Union for decades, and now they're free and independent states, but they depend upon the United States for leadership and guaranteeing their
So what happened if the Crimeans say we want to join Russia?
I don't know. We'll have to see what happens to that. Obviously, there's an argument about whether or not they can do that, given among other things, the Budapest Memorandum in 1994.
And of course, the Russians say that there was an unconstitutional coup in Kiev.
Right. So there's a debate, obviously, underway, and I don't know how it's going to unfold. But I think Putin is. I think he's got domestic problems at home. I don't think that this is a situation where there aren't vulnerabilities from the standpoint of the
But there's
Russian
also the energy weapon, too. I mean, can we, in a sense, provide the money and the energy to the people in Ukraine, so that therefore they'll feel less pressure from Russia?
Energy is also a weakness for Russia. They depend on energy, on petroleum, for 50% of their GDP. If the price of oil drops a few dollars, they go into recession. It accounts for most of the budget in the Russian government. So for him to be, again, talking about cutting off sales, that's a two-edged sword. It does not necessarily mean that it's going to create a bigger problem for the customer than it does for the supplier.
We could be looking at a new Cold War.
Well, I don't know that it'll go that far, but I think there should be no doubt in anybody's mind that the United States is going to do everything we can to mobilize NATO, our Western European friends and allies, to make certain that Putin gets the message that this kind of behavior is unacceptable and won't tolerate it, and he can't do it without paying a price.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Yes, sir, Charlie.
Good to see you.